But it was supposed to be for jail. So we were going to get a brand new jail for 22.8 million.
Right.
It took them
Okay.
so long.
Y'all ready?
Lost one with you.
Okay.
I was going to renovate it for 24 million.
We'll call to order the special meeting for Vermillion County Council. So please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Roll call, Mr. Costello.
Here.
Mr. Weir.
Here.
Mr. Somerville.
Here.
Mr. Bush.
Here.
Mrs. James, I'm here. Mr. Dreer.
Here.
And Mr. Brown.
Here.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for attending tonight. We do have just one thing tonight. It is the jail lease. You have an email copy and a printed copy of the lease agreement. We also discussed this partially in our last meeting last week. And then they are asking us to approve resolution number 2021-13 to allow the commissioners to enter into this lease for the jail. I have a question regarding the lease. In part 2, where it says rental payments under the section A, it says the lease not to exceed $1,450,000. When we got the schedule last week from Baker Tilly, the illustration that we were given showed borrowing about $18 million, and those payments never went over, I don't know, 1.24 maybe, around there. I guess why is such an increase in the lease amount versus the Baker Tilly illustration?
Well, we have Andy Mosier here from Baker Tilly that can go through that with you. The upshot is just to provide flexibility with respect to interest rate risk.
Okay. Is it purely on the interest rate or the amount being borrowed?
It would have a little bit of cushion on both.
Okay.
So if they did come in high, we did, decide you want to use the same amount of cash to borrow slightly more. We wanted to make sure you had that flexibility as well.
Okay.
So, I do have numbers that would hopefully go through those, what we think it is.
For current ones, is that borrowing the 17 million that we had talked about?
Correct.
Okay.
One thing you have to remember is you're not doing the borrowing.
Right. The
So
the building
you don't
company
get the
is.
decision of how much to borrow. What you're saying is you'll pay their payments up to a certain amount. So they can borrow up to whatever amount gets you to that payment. So if they want to borrow more based on their ability with this lease, they can borrow more at the building court. That wouldn't come back to you.
So basically, if we approve a lease for the 1.45 million per year in payments, they could technically issue bonds with up to that amount.
Yeah, I don't think there's any intention, though, on the commissioner's part to go forward with the financing that you guys are not on board with. So the way the process works is that you have your construction bidding process. As you know, and Garmong's on board now and has gone through project cost estimates, et cetera, and those will go out for bid, and then those bids will come in, and after the bids are received, they'll go through the bids and make sure they're a good solid bid. At that point, we'll through Baker Tilly determine exactly how much money needs to be borrowed, and then you go sell your bonds. Now, to be able to do that, because once we get those construction bids, they typically have a 60-day period before they expire. So we want to have all the approvals out of the way before that occurs. So what that means from an approval process is that the commissioners and the building corporation have to approve the lease preliminarily, which is what they've done. And then the commissioners later this evening will have a public hearing on the lease. And then the council has to approve the lease as it's described in your resolution this evening. And that resolution also pledges the jail or the public safety income taxes to the project. So once those approvals take place, then the county and the building corporation can execute the lease. And there's a 30-day period that has to expire before we can issue the bonds. So in the lease, it says there's this maximum lease rental, annual rental, and that can be adjusted down, it will be adjusted down to exactly the amount that's needed when the bonds are issued. So I think in arriving at this figure, Baker Tilly wanted to provide some flexibility. So if the bids don't come in exactly as expected, then we don't have to throw out those bids and go all the way back to the start, because that's what we'd have to do with a new hearing on the lease and a new 30-day period. So I don't think that in this number, I mean, I haven't heard anything from the commissioners that they didn't want to have consensus on, what amount is borrowed. It's simply so we don't have to restart that process. So we can update the council once the bids come in, and if for some reason they're high and they're not such that you only borrow 17 million, then we can, you can make that decision if you want to apply more cash to it or you want to borrow a little bit more, and we don't have to throw out the bids.
Did we discuss that last week, that they were gonna put like 6 million, I think, Mr. Weir said, into that, and we were gonna borrow 17, was it?
And maybe it'd be good for Andy to go through that.
Do you have current ones with the 17 million being borrowed, those numbers?
I can go those real quick, if that would be helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Give you just a minute to pass those along, but these are very similar to the numbers we discussed last week with the $17 million borrowing, and actually the annual payment comes out kind of right where we had estimated it as we were talking through that last week. So maybe just take a look at pages 2 and 3, so the sources and uses page. You can see the 19.1 million hard construction number, 3.4 million in total soft costs, of which you've already paid about $500,000. We've also kind of shown the inmate relocation costs with the 18-month option, just to kind of show you, that on both sides of the equation, and then the bond issuance costs of the underwriting fee and then other professional fees. So total about 24 million, but again with that, with the inmate relocation costs backed out, that's about $23 million actual construction numbers. So then we've shown, in order to borrow 17 million, you would need to put in about almost 7.2 million of cash total. Now that's the 500,000 you've already paid in architect and engineering fees to date, the $1.25 million for the inmate relocation costs, and then about another 5.4 million for remaining construction costs. So you can see then gets you to a total of 24.2 million there. So then on the next page, take a look at what that would look like. And again, this is based on similar rate assumptions, what we talked about last week. You can see on the 20-year financing, net interest rate somewhere in the range of 2.25% to 2.5%. Your total annual payment, once we get to the full payments after that 2-year construction period, would be a little under 1.2 million, so about $1,170,000. So as Rick was explaining, what we wanted to do is make sure we gave you some flexibility really in 2 places. One is on the construction numbers. If your bids were to come in high, we wanted to give you that option to either borrow more or use more cash. So if you were able to come up with more cash and keep the financing at 17 million, then I think that 1,450,000 is certainly more than enough to cover that. But did want to give you that flexibility in case you did want to borrow more if bids were to come in, say 10% over current estimates, for example. And then we also wanted to give you some flexibility on interest rates. So I think the rates we're showing here probably have maybe a 0.25% cushion over current market. If we were to go out today, I think your payment would be a little bit less than what we're showing here because of that interest rate differential. But just with having to kind of get through the bond rating process, wait for bids to come in, we won't actually be selling bonds for a couple months. And so just to allow for any interest rate movement, wanted to give you some cushion in the rates there. So kind of back to that question, there really is kind of two pieces of cushion in that number, which would be if you did elect to borrow more than the 17 million, and then you know, if interest rates were to come in higher than what we're estimating here.
And again, that would all just be so we don't have to restart the process. If the bids come in more than Andy's showing here, there's going to be another conversation about what we do.
Okay.
And you know, I'm not a construction professional, but, you know, just from experience working with other counties around the state, I mean, it will come of no surprise to you. I mean, there's a feeling that costs are escalating. So we wouldn't want to get in a situation where if we had a bid that was acceptable, that we had to throw it out because we had to restart the process.
Does anyone else have any other questions?
Pardon that?
You have any questions regarding the lease?
Not really regarding the
No.
lease, I have a tough time with this right now because we had, about 5 years ago, the council was asked to implement a tax, and we went from 0.25, I believe it was, to 1.50 to generate money for this jail. And it got kicked around. After we did that, the commissioners couldn't make up their mind what to do for 5 years. We were gonna get a brand new jail for 22.8 million with additional beds, more than what we have now. And now we're gonna get a renovation of our old jail for more money. It just kinda, this cost is just gonna keep going up, and I can see it going up with the inflation of materials now, even with the bids and stuff coming in, it's just gonna keep going up. I think the taxpayers deserve better stewards of their money right now and spending this money. I guess we need a jail. No one's ever really convinced me totally we even actually need a jail. I think, Tim, you've been in some meetings that I've been in, and no one ever really came up with a total saying that we need a jail right now, or we need beds. I mean, are we gonna start housing more, or is the state gonna come in and mandate that?
Right now, the jail's overcrowded now.
Pardon?
The jail's overcrowded right
Okay.
now.
Well, thank God that Britton came on board, because once he got on board, things has moved along pretty progressively. I mean, it's moved along really well.
I will say I visited jail, I'm gonna say about 18 months ago, and I was surprised how, I'll say, deteriorated it was, especially in the, I'll say, the common area where all the equipment and stuff is.
Right.
It needs help.
Right, I agree with you, Mr. Ware. I think that, you know, it almost sounds like we're putting a Band-Aid on an old jail down there
I
right now.
agree.
You know. Pardon?
I said I agree with you.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
So once this resolution is passed, will the commissioners come back to us then and keep us informed on the actual amounts? And then have discussion if it goes over needing to borrow 17 million?
I have no issues doing that. Do you guys have any issues coming back? I mean, I sat where you guys sit now, so I mean, I think it's imperative to work together and not blindside you guys before a meeting, or, you know, a week before and say, oh, by the way, we've known about this for 3 months and we're just not telling you.
I think you're on the council when we were blindsided by a building.
Yeah, well, blindsided by several things.
Yeah.
Well, no, I think it's imperative that we keep you informed if anything changes.
Okay,
I think we're gonna have to all work together if we're gonna accomplish anything.
Absolutely.
agreed. Alright. Anyone else have questions regarding the amortization schedule or the lease? Okay, the resolution
Tim?
is the item that we have to adopt or to pass tonight.
I have another question.
What's it?
I just have, Tim, transferring these prisoners, you know, to do the 18-month deal, which I think is good to get this project done and over with. But has other counties done that? Have we looked into that cost of doing that? Transportation's not included in that, is it?
I think part of that funding, if I'm not mistaken, of that, I believe that, you help me with that. but this comes from the sheriff.
Sheriff's got, I think, $400,000 or some amount of money set aside to help with that, but he's checked with other counties, and, I mean, especially for just the jail staff in general, I think it's better to move them out.
Oh, I have to agree with that. I mean, I think the
But yeah, Mike's
project go a
got
lot
some money
smoother, a lot
set aside.
faster, but
I wouldn't quote me on 400,000, but I wanna say that's somewhere around that range.
that figure they have in there is really not a good solid figure, because a lot of those are DOCs, aren't they, that we
Not very
counted or
many.
not? Or they're just strictly our
No,
prisoners?
there's not a
I
lot.
think there's 2 that might be right
I'm
now.
sorry.
There may be 2 right now.
Oh, okay. Okay.
The thing is that we also get money still from the state for these prisoners also. Not that it'll be there in a timely manner to be able to pay our bills, we'll still need to be able to pay our bills, but we'll also have $35, I think, a prisoner per day also.
Those are the DOC ones.
What did they decide to do with the one that's, I wanna say mentally handicapped or whatever we were housing? We're gonna keep them there?
I believe there's 2 cells that are going to be kept aside for, at least 2, and maybe 4, but at least 2 cells will be kept because they'll still have prisoners, or, not prisoners. but
Probably
inmates.
gotta be hard to get people to take them, I mean,
Well, they got the one that they're gonna have to move back and forth, that they'll keep there, because they
Yeah.
don't think that anybody will take him. And then there's also a cell or 2 that, for incoming personnel that,
Like short-term overnight.
yeah, that they'll get arrested, they have maybe wait for arraignment, or they'll have arraignment immediately, and then they'll be shipped off, but they still have to have a holding facility for them while they're here. So those have been worked out there with the engineering, with the sheriff. There's an understanding, as long as we don't get overly inundated in one night.
I'm done.
You're fine. Anybody else? Okay. Well, if there's no further questions, thank you, Andy, for the updated projections.
Absolutely.
So, we would need to adopt the resolution to allow the commissioners to proceed.
I'll make the motion that we adopt the resolution to proceed as provided.
I'll second it.
Okay, I have a motion by Mr. Weir, a second by Mr. Brown, to adopt resolution number 2021-13 regarding the lease for the jail. Is there any further discussion? Okay. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, signify by
Aye.
saying no. All right, the resolution is approved. All right, that is the only item on our agenda this evening. So pending any further comment, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Motion made to adjourn.
Okay, thank you. Meeting's adjourned. Thank you.
Sign it.
Yeah.
Get the sign it.
Who's that tall guy? No, we didn't give his name.